Hey, how's it going, everyone? My name is Lucas, and today I'll be talking about the podcast about the name of Playing God. It's an account of triage by a reporter named Sherry. She kind of talks about a few incidents that she's been in that involved triage and how people use triage in different ways that may be kind of looked at or frowned upon. Before I get into the podcast, I'm going to talk a little about myself and my experience with triage and how I usually look at triage and what I've used triage as. So in my field, which was medical in the military, we use triage as we have four categories pretty much. It was minimal, delayed, immediate, and then expected. Uh, Quick breakdown: the categories would be minimal, would be like really basic injuries, so maybe a bruise, a small cut, something really small, really unimportant. Usually, the patient doesn't have a lot of say, or we're not gonna really do much for the person if there's more present injuries going on. Delayed would be kind of something like broken bones, so something that's semi-serious but not life-threatening, so the person will survive if it doesn't get immediate care. He might be in pain, but it's not really important because he's not dying as we see it. Immediate would be the main prime kind of category that we would focus on. These would be the patients that are on the verge of dying, or not mostly on the verge of dying, but they're seriously injured to the point where their injuries can lead to dying. So what we would do, we would stabilize them pretty much and try to keep them alive to where we can move them to higher care, usually being to a hospital or something like a field aid station. Uh, and then the expecting category is the category that usually we determine for the people who are so injured or they're at the verge of dying that there's really nothing we can do for them, and that's going to be the expected category. And it's kind of usually the iffy side of when it comes to ethics. And this kind of video addresses some of the things that I experienced in the military myself. Um, Between the categories, people can actually move around. So one can go from minimal to delayed, and one can go from delayed to immediate, and vice versa. One can go from immediate back to delay, depending on how the person is doing. If the person stabilizes, or if the person is doing better. But that's a little background on triage from my experience and how I view it. In the podcast, the reporter talks about her experience in the accounts of Katrina in the hospital setting, where pretty much the hurricane hit and the hospital kind of shut down and lost power, and they had to make some really hard calls. And in the hospital, they made a triage of, I believe, like one, two, threes. Pretty much categories. The same would be minimal, delayed, and immediate in my eyes. But the way they did it, they evac the minimals and they kind of kept back the immediates, which for me is very strange, and I think that's out of place, and that's where I think the hospital went completely wrong. Uh, from my practice, we take care of the most serious people. We try to get them evac'd, and usually that's the people who are going to need the most care, so we try to get them to other care facilities where they can get that care. With this, it kind of seemed that they did the opposite, where they took the most minimal minimal people and they kind of pushed them along, which I think was completely wrong. Because the way I see it, if they're surviving or they don't need immediate care, well, they're able to survive without medical treatment for a long enough time to where they can be evac last. Compared to people who are in dire need of care, well, if you cannot give them care, you're pretty much kind of killing them. So that's why I found that kind of completely off when they came to that hospital thinking. Um, for the people who had no resuscitation orders, if they were completely out and like passed out and not viable, at that point I would make them expected. So I would keep them back because at that point you're kind of wasting resources, and you don't want to waste resources on people who you don't think are gonna make it anyways. So it's kind of a harsh way to look at it, but that's kind of how it usually works. When it came to the medicine, completely fine as being malpractice. Giving medications to kind of pretty much euthanize people was completely wrong on my part, and someone should be held accountable for it. There's the way we see it in medical in the military may look a little wrong to some people too, but usually we kind of keep medications off people so they are feeling pain, so we can tell they're actually living. Because I might be dealing with multiple injured people, and the only way I can tell if someone's alive if they're talking, moaning, yelling. So it's kind of a harsh way to see it, but I don't know. For me, pushing medications, extra medications to kind of put people at ease is wrong, especially if those medications can kill them, which in fact they did. So in my eyes, that was complete malpractice and completely wrong. When it came to the podcast and talking about the earthquake in Haiti, that's the reporter found it really tough to accept what they did was right, but in the end of the day, what they did was right because triage is not like permanent care. It's more immediate care. It's something that we do to stabilize people so we can push them along to pretty much higher care. So triage is not permanent care. So taking oxygen off to save that oxygen for maybe someone else that comes into triage that might need it, that unfortunately is the right thing to do. Even if it's looks like the wrong thing to do or a really hard thing to do, it is the right thing to do. Um, so the reporter kind of really got emotional about that. Unfortunately, there is no room for emotions in triage. It's kind of a really cut and dry, kind of get to the point, do what you have to instead of think emotionally and get upset about things. It's really hard to deal with. It could be really hard for people, especially if people get really emotional over things. But unfortunately, it was the right thing to do, even though it may look like the wrong thing to do. But triage kind of works in that way where you stabilize people and then you kind of push them along to other areas. But but that's my point of view of triage. At the end of the day, it's not an easy topic for most people. It's kind of hard to deal with, but it is what it is, and you kind of cope with it. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed my little discussion, and hope to see your comments. Thank you.